puts the world together for us. Because we think there's lots of separate bits, and he didn't. He thought it was one great unity which divides internally. It wasn't aggregated, it wasn't built together from bits. You know, you can build two kinds of clay figures. You can get an egg and make a body, and you can add arms, and then add legs, and then add a head. But the universe isn't built like that. He said, you get a big lump of clay, and you extrude the arms and the fingers, which is the way baby grows, and you extrude the legs, and then the feet, and then the toes, and then the head with the nose and the eye. Because out of that egg, by subdivisions, as we're going to talk about in a few moments, the baby pushes its way out from an egg shape and actually builds all these little sensory things to go out into the world and opens itself out from a ball. He's going to be talking about the fact that, you know, in that process we're unfolding like a tree does, like a seed, and going out into the world and trying to develop in that way. And that's because the universe actually unfolds like that. The unity can be picked up, can be seen, can be subsumed from one subject to another. I can't do it, but he could, and he's going to do it in front of our eyes today. And he does it in all the damn talks as well. And you don't get the gist, that's all. I wanted to point out the fact that he hadn't seen the subject before he walked in. So we included the question, which is just a little bit, and these often don't start when he began talking. So you come in usually to a situation which has already started to roll. Have we got a subject for tonight? Question from the audience. I was rather interested, Eugene, in this program that I didn't see that said that the amount of tension stimulation that a baby gets in its very early months can condition the whole reaction to life. So our missed word must be put into us very early, which gives us a difficult problem that we're going to struggle with later. Okay? So that's the sort of unformulated question that you or I could possibly throw up when you're presented with somebody saying, what are we going to talk about tonight? And as if you'd rehearsed it many times. Yes, well, of course, it begins considerably earlier than birth. In fact, it begins with a gentleman called Adam. So immediately you feel you're in the presence of someone whose mind is working at a different pace. Can you feel that? Right?
Yeah.
An unprepared speaker doesn't usually bounce back like that, and then leads logically through a subject. Okay, within seconds of being presented with it. So if I don't have been banging on about that, but that's one of the things that you notice. You struggle to put all these things into sentences, but the logic of the words, there is not a missed word or a double word or a repetition which isn't done purely for effect. We don't speak like that. Listen to human beings. If you've ever written dialogue for a play or something, or if you've ever been involved in plays and noticed how people actually speak, we rarely, finish sentence properly, and we lose our thread very easily. Okay? Let's draw a circle here to represent the original human protoplasm from which we all derive. Now it's a fact, not a theory, that all multiplication of biological elements is by division. That's quite a surprise, really. When you think about it, we talk about the human race multiplying, but actually we're dividing. If you consider that there must have been an original human being, an original, if you like, nuclear family from which everything else developed, they have subdivided because they had children that had children that had children. And we are actually dividing rather than multiplying. Can you see that we're doing both simultaneously? Yeah? That's an important aspect about the way the universe works. Now this same thing that you can observe under the microscope in a monocelled animal occurs in the multiplication of human beings. Only the mode of doing it is less obvious. You get under the microscope a monocell and watch it long enough and you will actually see the thing goes through a process of division. It has inside it a little nuclear spot, the intelligence. This is observed to behave in a peculiar way and then to divide itself into two centres, and it builds a wall up. And then it pinches where the wall is and gradually brings itself into a state where it can sever itself into two beings. Now John's put those diagrams in there. As I say, they're not the ones he used, but they're ones which I presume he's got from the internet or somewhere, which he's using to describe that same process, because most of us did it in biology at school. Yes? Yeah. Or behind the back sheds, I don't know. Should have been done there as well. So it's one of those processes which we should know about. Okay? And gradually it brings itself to a state where it can sever itself into two beings. So that all the information, what it's doing there, it actually replicates, it actually copies its information into long strands, and then as it separates and divides away, both daughter cells have got the same information in them that the big one had in the first place. Okay? And that's the basic method of multiplication by division. The implications of this in religion and philosophy are tremendous, because it means that none of us actually start life with a blank tablet, as some thinkers assume. The tabula rasa, the blank tablet of certain philosophical schools, is just a pure abstraction. It never did exist. This idea of let's see, a blank tablet that we're coming, it's not just philosophers in that sense, it's social theorists as well consider the fact that we come into life, and certainly educationalists, when I was being trained in education, they spoke about the fact of, is it a tabula rasa? Are we given a child which has got no predispositions to any particular subject or inherited intelligence, etc.? Or is it literally whatever the educators put in? Is it literally down purely to the parents, or do they already come in slanted? So, and you can argue backwards and forwards on that. Halliday's coming in very basically here, definitely, and saying, right, it never did exist. That's a pure abstraction. Everything that comes into this world already prefigured. And what happens with a human being? Every human being derives from an egg. And at a certain stage, a portion of this egg is set off for reproducing in the next generation. If we like to say in this diagram schematically, we'll just cut it in half and say that one half is for the next generation. We write NG, or no good, the next generation. These are the sex cells. And on this side, the somatic cells, which are going to develop into the body. Of course, it's more complicated than this because the sex cells are really inside the somatic cells. So he's drawing an abstracted diagram of literally the cell. I'm guessing here, that I didn't see the original thing. And inside, he's putting NG. In other words, these things here are separated. They're not going to develop into the body. They're going to stay as they were from literally the two parents. They're preserving that information here, and these are reserved purely for sex cells, and they will divide in a different way. Okay, they split themselves in a different way to produce the chromosomes that are going to go forward into the next generation. We write NG, or no good, for the next generation. Those are the sex cells. And on this side, the somatic cells, which are going to develop in the body. Of course, it's more complicated than this because the sex cells are really inside the somatic cells. Some of the cells are going to become body, and some of the cells are not going to become body until they've been extruded and joined to other cells from a person of the opposite sex and projected into the future. But the sex cells and the somatic cells are created by dividing the original cells. So that process you see there that John's put in that diagram produces all the cells, and then in the actual zygote it's separating these out, and it's saying, I'm not going to use those. These somatic ones will start to develop the body, and we've said that, it's going to turn out, it's going to push arms and legs out, and it's going to create itself a body that looks pretty much like me. Like you. Okay? From literally pushing outwards like that and developing, and these things are going to literally divide like that, and then divide again and divide, and there's going to be more and more and more of them, and they'll all have exactly the same information. Okay? Which again is another aspect which he says is fascinating, because very suddenly all these ones who've all got exactly the same information suddenly turn into a head or a toenail or an ear or whatever, and start to become specific things. But it keeps these separate, and they're going to divide in a different way, so that then they're going to be projected out in the process of sex and join up somebody else's no good cells to create another individual.
Can I just ask then?
Yeah.
The other cells
Yeah.
have got 46 chromosomes, and those in the NG have got 23. I'm dragging that from A-level biology.
They've got 46 at the moment. They're going to go through a process of dividing and separating themselves out so that they've got 23.
Right.
Because you need 23 for this process here, because you're going to get 23 from the other person.
Yeah. But at the moment they've got 46.
Yeah, they're exactly the same as all of these at this point until they go through that process of becoming sexually polarized. Okay? Right? It is important because it means that, well, we'll see how it goes on because it's fascinating. Until they have been extruded, joined to another cell in the process of sexual reproduction, and then projected into the next. Projected into the future. But the sex cells and the somatic cells are created by dividing originally from your mum and dad. You got they're made of the same original process. So although they're separated off here, they are exactly the same until they go through that separating process. So we come to a very peculiar fact which is ignored because it's too simple. The whole human protoplasm, here represented by one circle, has divided itself and through progressive divisions has multiplied itself. So you've got to imagine that all these cells here have come from one original, which came from mum and dad, and then they've divided into millions of cells, and they've separated some off, which are exactly the same, but we're not going to use them for making a body. We're going to save them, and later on we'll project them into a sexual situation, and we'll create another generation here, because we'll be mum and dad for this generation. So mum and dad have done that, and all those cells are exactly the same, and have all got exactly the same information. We have about 20,000 million such results in the world today at the human level. Now all these millions of people are derived from the original human protoplasm, called in certain mystical schools the Adamic plasm. And this plasm has certain qualities. The basic quality of all this protoplasm is the quality of heritability. By the way, at the back we've put a few definitions in the endnotes. Things like germ cells, which are the sex cells, ecophory, protoplasm, meiosis and mitosis, and gnosticism. We've got a few words there that you might be unfamiliar with if you want to run through them. Again, when you're doing a transcript, you don't have to do that, but you can if you like. But keep it separate. Keep it separate. It should be the end notes.
It depends which one. Alan and I have got two different numbers, and they're in one and not in the other.
Okay.
Sorry.
And this protoplasm has certain qualities. The basic quality of the protoplasm is the quality of irritability. Irritability does not mean that your grandmother gets annoyed with you in the field of biology. It means when a stimulus comes, the substance of this being moves in response to the stimulus. The stimulus energy goes in and modifies the protoplasm receiving it. And that protoplasm reacts back onto the stimulus source. There is an action from the stimulus and a reaction from the protoplasm, and this we call the irritability of the protoplasm. Right. This is difficult, this part. He's hitting us with facts. He's going through what he wants us to know before he then starts to use that and describe a process which is very important for us. So what he's saying now is these protoplasmic lumps have got a quality in biology which is called irritability, which means that if you hit them with a stimulus, I mean, one of the big ones which he talks about, maybe I think it's a bit later on, is the fact that you can, if this is a single cell creature, or if this is you can hit it with a mild acid like lemon juice or something like that, and it will respond. You can hit it with a loud noise, and it will respond. the impetus goes in, and the cell reacts in some way. It will move away, it will shrink, it will go towards sugar and sweetness or something like that. So it has a response from a centre here. It is able to respond to some stimulus from outside. That's what a biologist means by irritability. This tissue here is able to respond to its environment. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah? So as you said, it doesn't mean that your grandmother gets snarky with you. It just means that your tissue is able to respond. And different tissues respond in different ways. Some are very sensitive to sound, some are very sensitive to light. Essentially, you'd have to say all those possibilities of response are hidden inside each of the cell inside there, because they're going to specialize and become more sensitive to sound or to light or to taste or to whatever later on. So there must be, if you like, a shadow or a potential of sensitivity to all sorts of stimulus inside of that cell. A single cell has this cellular irritability, meaning this power to receive incoming energy and to react to it. But it not only does this, it not only reacts to it, but it retains a trace of the original stimulus and its own reaction. So, if it gets a stimulus like that, the vibration, Eugene would say, of that stimulus going in and the response is recorded, it's forever in that tissue, he would say. He's actually saying that there's a memory trace of that. And this thing learns its responses and learns how to deal with situations like that. Because in some way it seems to record, even at a cellular level, how to respond. Right? Now that to me was new information when I listened to this tape. Halliday's saying this is what it is. And in conversation with other people, yes, there's a limited description of that. But it must do, because these things are able to learn how to deal with on the cellular life. And there are some creatures that live in the sea, which are very large single-cell creatures. Some of them are around 2 meters long, but it's still only one cell. So we know that this is true, and they do learn, and they do accommodate themselves to their environment. This means that once a stimulus has been put in and a certain amount of energy, which initiates a movement of the protoplasm, that movement continues in that protoplasm throughout the whole period of the existence of it. This is the ground of our memory. It's also the ground of the engram patterns, which constitute various mental disorders later. We can see here that because this protoplasm has this power to retain the patterns of all emotions that it's ever experienced, that the result is that every new stimulus comes into an existing pattern. Okay. Now he's using a word here which is now much debased, the word engram. What he's saying is that if this thing here records the stimulus, and at the human level, this is literally could be another being, a reaction to another being, a situation, an event if you like, and the response to it, that memory is somewhere encoded and involved and stored, if you like, even as a vibration in that tissue forever. What he's going to say is that these become overlaid, but that overlaying doesn't mean to say that that original one has gone anywhere. Based on the fact that if you have extremely sensitive instruments, you can pick up vibrations in that thing for a hell of a long time, as you can in just a bucket full of water or a bowl of water. The movements in it, if you've got very sensitive instruments, you can pick these things up for months afterwards, you know, so that the sensitivity of literally liquids and fluids to retain those vibrations depends on what is overlaid on top of them or what happens afterwards. So, once this thing has had some sort of stimulus, and it's had stimulus since its first moment of existence, every other stimulus that comes in is coming into a cell which is already vibrating. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So if someone else comes along here and drops another chemical or whatever and stimulates it, it's already meeting, it's got to deal with the response pattern of the original situation, plus this new one. So complex and fascinating interactions are happening within inside that little zone of editable protoplasm. So the result is that every new stimulus comes into an existing pattern. Now there never has been a time when a cell existed with no pattern in it. For a cell to exist, a living cell, there must be a nuclear intelligence which is already characterized. And furthermore, the surrounding substance from the nucleus itself responds. This has irritability capacity, responds to the stimulus and retains the motion characteristic of the stimulus. Okay? So, we've said that there's the nucleus in here, which is also recording and storing that information. Remember, these headings, the generation of protoplasm, memory, etc., are the ones which John has added. The talk just flowed right the way through. And the talk didn't even have a title. The title was added much later, when people read it and said, well, what the hell is he talking about? Well, what can we call it? We'll call it ancestral influence. Because somewhere later on he'll mention that word. And that covers the most of it, because he will meander through different topics and subjects and come back again to this general theme. Now imagine an egg here, and this egg has been subjected to various experiences. The experiences are all engrammed inside it, hence this word engram. This is because people like the Scientologists, strangely enough, when I first came into contact with Ishval and Eugene Halliday and stuff, I'd just come up from London. My first year at university we down in London staying at the LSE. And while we were moving, I remember where we were staying, we had to walk down Tottenham Road and had a big Scientologist place down there. And we were literally harangued to join the Scientologists. It was very big business. And of course, it wasn't out there. And they were talking about engrams and the fact that they'd come in and help to remove engram problems from you, etc. And it didn't seem suspicious then, but, you know, so, but you can hear what, you know, the way that those words are actually being used and bandied about. But originally it just meant that it's a pattern which is actually charged into the substance, and it can control all subsequent responses. So that if you've had a particularly bad reaction to lemon juice, say for instance, as a singular monocell, that's going to condition every other reaction you get. With citrus fruits probably, you're going to have a real problem with engramic citrus fruits, or anything slightly acidic. No, I'm actually making it very light, I'm just saying. But what you have recorded here will condition your next experience in some way. So it's something which can simplify it and be made ridiculous in that sense, but it is actually a very sophisticated way of looking at the way that this thing, protoplasm, records information and preserves that recording until it's overlaid with further and further information. Now imagine we have an egg, and this egg has been subjected to various experiences. The experiences are all engrammed inside, and the reactions to those stimuli are also engrammed. So that the totality of all the experiences of the protoplasm continues. Now if we divide this egg, or the egg divides itself by splitting its nucleus, there it is back on that diagram that John put in. By splitting its nucleus, we get two eggs with exactly the same information. Because these two eggs are identical protoplasm of the original, they also have the traces of the experience they had before the division. Now this is the ground of what we call ancestral experience. This is the basis of the falling dream and such like phenomena. It's the ground of Carl Jung's collective unconscious, and so on. Every egg now existing contains within itself residual traces of the experience that same protoplasm had before the cell divided. Okay? I know it's quite wordy and difficult, but are you still with it? Yeah? Okay? Because the conclusions he draws from that are fascinating. So if we go on, starting from any modern man pushing back through his parents, we are pushing back all the time into this original protoplasm. And the important thing to realise is that the protoplasm of our body, the one we have now, is not new. If we are 21, it's not just 21 years old. The one we have now, it is exactly as old as the human race. There is no human protoplasm that is not as old as the human race. Consequently, nobody comes into this world unconditioned. Okay. I think we can have a wow there because... Yeah, and there's a little time signature that John's put in. It's 8 minutes 59 into the talk. Okay? So that just helps you. So if you wanted to say, he didn't really say that, go and have a look. Okay, it'll be on the computer.
I think I'm needing an explanation as to what protoplasm is, as opposed to a cell.
Cell, well, protoplasm is a group of cells all combined together into a unity, into a tissue that's able to respond. If you turn to my handy back page,
yes.
Okay, germ cells, multicellular eukaryotes are made from two fundamental cell types. Notice where I slipped past that word. 3 down, protoplasm, the fluid living content of the cell that consists of 2 major divisions, the cytoplasm and the nucleoplasm, cell nucleus. Charles Darwin viewed protoplasm as the holistic content of a cell. In other words, cells were composed of a mysterious protoplasm, a substance that could self-replicate or copy itself and reproduce. From the Greek proto, first, plasma, something moulded. The word was late Latin, meaning first created thing. It was used by a Czech physiologist, Johannes Evangelista Puccini, to note the gelatinous fluid found in living tissue. Wait till you get to the German version. This word prevailed through Germanic language, though Germanic language purists preferred Urschleim, original mucus. I put that in because the idea of German Urschleim, original mucus, appealed to me.
It's very descriptive, isn't it?
It is very descriptive, yeah.
Sounds like it does what it doesn't.
Puts it right back to the slippery stuff that we all know and love. Yeah. Does that take us any further on?
Yeah, that's the bit that I've got now.
Yeah.
Is the fact that it can replicate itself. So
Yes.
because cells die continuously,
Yeah.
but if this protoplasm that is within the original cell can reproduce itself in every new cell, that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And what he would say is it's also modified by the experience that the cell, the original cell, that has separated itself, has actually added in this way by the responses that it's come across and the situations that it's lived through.
Is that information recorded then in the nucleus?
What he said
isn't
is
that
unclear.
where all the information is for another cell?
At this point, he hasn't said that.
Oh.
What he said is that the movement, the pattern, has been recorded as a movement and as a response. Is what, as I'm taking it, is what he said so far.
Right.
But he's hinted at the fact that the nucleus is able to store and intelligently use that information. But I don't think he's actually nailed that down yet, as far as I'm reading this. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody?
Well, it says here the surrounding substance around the nucleus
Yeah.
retains the motion characteristics
Yeah.
of the stimulus.
As a motion characteristic rather than as an idea or
Right.
as anything else. So it's like a body of water, and I'm remembering this from other things he said. Literally a bucket, if you bash it and the ripples go through it, then you see the ripples subside in that sense, but there's still, if you've got a very sensitive instrument, you can pick up that that's still vibrating even tomorrow.
Is it a little bit like, is it homeopathy?
Yeah.
How you can keep diluting it and diluting it and diluting it until, to all intents and purposes, there isn't anything there, but there is still somehow the memory of the original
No, I
No.
think it's not as subtle as it's not as subtle as that,
Right.
because what he's talking about is the fact that that impetus is still going on inside the cell. It doesn't die down, other than other things overlay it, if you like. But I think this will emerge as we go on a bit further.
Yes,
Okay.
This applies to all animals, doesn't it? I mean, to a degree, it's got to. Like, you know, that programme that was on the other night about apes and
Right.
gorillas and so on.
I didn't see the program, but
Well, I mean, they're animals, aren't
unless you
they?
mean neighbours.
Well, you know, they too must have memories to some extent. You probably haven't time for
At this point, I think he's actually meaning. I wouldn't even take it to go as far to say animals. I think he's talking about the fact that bodies of fluids retain vibrations, and that this being a living fluid, it's actually sensitive to that. At this stage in the thing, I don't think he's even talking about brains recording, or he's talking about literally body, somatic recording of information. So it's almost like the information of having once ridden a bicycle you never forget. You know?
Yeah, but
People still fall off. don't
it would follow, wouldn't it? Unless
Yeah.
there's some reason why
Yeah.
not. That animals would
they? Absolutely. Yeah.
go through that process.
Yeah,
And-
because you're not going back to the first man, because the first man didn't suddenly appear.
No.
He developed. So the answer
Yes.
is yes.
He came from a creature that was very close to a human being, and in that sense came with a great deal of information already structured inside of it. And this is why we actually have built into us responses that we know came from millions and millions of years ago, like blinking our eyes. We didn't need to blink our eyes when we lived in the sea, because our eyes are always moist. But when you come out of the sea, if you don't blink your eyes, they dry out very quickly and they're no use. So that blinking pattern is something that we had to learn pretty damn quick when we came out of the sea. And what you're doing is you're washing them with salty water, which is what you did when they were in the sea, which you didn't need to do inside the sea. So most of our processes, you can very cleverly say, you know, these structures inside us, we have a little sea, which is called our bloodstream, which is pumped around very rapidly because it's very, very densely full of chemicals. All those chemicals used to float past us when we lived in the ocean, and we used to grab it as it went past, so to speak. But now we've got it all kept inside with a skin around it so that it doesn't dehydrate. Keep drinking water, and that's why our internal fluids are salty. We are still an enclosed sea, which is very efficiently being cleaned by our processes inside our kidneys, etc., and being refined because we have got such a small sea which is trapped inside. So you could then extrapolate along the same sort of way and say that that's what this is. It's a living structure that has developed itself so that it can then do some very, very fascinating and interesting things, like snooker and cricket, which you can't play underwater.
Could you just quickly define somatic?
Body. It's literally from the old word of body, so that these somatic cells will be used to make body, to build body, bone, muscle, nerve tissue, etc. And these will be separated off, will not develop in those ways, will not specialize in those ways, which will be kept just to produce sex cells in the magic way of losing half their
So we're
chromosomes.
going beyond somatic. with
Yes.
this, okay.
And because you got that, that's got all the information from both your mum and your dad stored inside that cell. These ones keep it pristine. They don't bother to specialize and just become eyeballs or ears or toenails. They keep themselves in this mutable sense, so that when they literally separate out and produce sperm or produce eggs, then you get 50-50 from mum and dad that then projects into the next. So literally, since this is replicating all the time and copying the information into its daughter cells, then the same information is being shared down across all the generations. And what Halliday is going to say is the only thing that damps that information down is more information coming on top. So that that vibration doesn't die away until it gets overlaid and overlaid and overlaid. And the overlaying become like layers of the onion, is what he's going to say in a few moments. That's a sneak preview. Okay? Does that still make sense? Has anybody got any objection to what I'm saying? The only thing which I find problematic is that I don't know why that doesn't just seem to die down. He would say that it only dies down because it's overlaid by other stimuli. Other vibrations come through it and make that one harder to find. But you can still find it. Okay, now that's something which I am, in that sense, sort of taking on trust because it's Halliday. But there is a great deal of information that vibrations do continue in bodies, you know, literally in vibrating strings, etc., long after we can hear them or we can see them reacting.
Please, could I ask, is his use of the word irritable, used specially?
Yes,
Just,
by biologists.
oh, right, because it has, to me it has a connotation of dislike.
Yes.
If you're irritable, something is happening to you that you don't like.
Yeah. It includes that, but the biologists would say we're using it just to point out to the fact that this cell is able to respond or react
Yes,
to
but
its
they're not
environment.
using the word respond or react or dislike or like or...
No,
That's
but they're given a separate definition for it, and that's what Halliday's drawing to our attention before we move on. That it doesn't necessarily have that connotation in the biological framework.
Okay.
It's reacting. I've carried on that theme by saying lemon juice, which would make it move away.
Yes,
But if there
I
was
can
a
understand
sugar
lemon
solution
juice, you know, it's a bit sour, maybe it
Yes.
stings.
Yeah.
Um,
And we associate that with irritability. But if we actually said it would also move towards something which it saw as a foodstuff, if it could actually absorb it very readily. So if it was glucose or something, it presumably would move towards it and grab that. In fact, it does, doesn't it?
yes, but that still comes under the word irritability.
To a biologist, yes.
Right,
Stimulus,
okay,
we
it's
would
a
say.
specifically
Yeah,
defined word in
Yeah.
biology.
in its limited usage in this subject. Sorry, Esther.
And Dick's just telling me what you're telling me, I think.
Right.
I beg pardon.
When you finished. Yeah?
Yes, I might go on. Go on.
Yes, sorry.
I also have difficulty with this degradation, because normally something, although it still could be there for a long time,
Yes.
it seems to be degraded, and yet in some way it can't be so. One's memory doesn't work like that.
No.
You may forget lots of things, but you remember some things. There must be some reinforcing
Yep.
thing that goes on, and I don't know how that is, but there must be a reinforcing of some aspects of the vibrations, and other aspects you seem to discard and allow to degrade.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of choosing going on in some curious way.
The way Halliday would respond to that, and this is me interpreting him, is how the lecture will go, is that it doesn't die down at all. What happens is other things go on top of it and overlay it. So that, to give a sort of trite example, I can hear the birds outside. I can't hear them when someone speaks because the voice of someone speaking overlays the birds, but I know that it's going on underneath. And in that sense, he's going to say, what the fascinating thing with human beings is that all our experiences are still vibrating inside us, and we can find them. That's what we're going to get to in a period of time, and that means all the pleasurable and unpleasurable experiences are still in there, and unconsciously conditioning how we respond to people, and sometimes making us irritable with people who aren't in themselves problems, but remind us of problems that we used to have, or that we've had with blondes in the past.
Perhaps the use of the word, you know how you were saying degrade or degradation. This gentleman said degradation, and perhaps that's the wrong word to use. You're saying about memories, how some memories we retain, and other memories seem to degrade. I don't think they degrade because they're probably still in. They're still in there, but there's no purpose in us keep remembering certain things. But we probably can, if necessary, go back to those old memories because they are being overlaid. They are being overlaid by other things, but they, like you say, we can if we tune into the birds outside, they're still there.
Yes.
So the amount of energy is increasing all the time.
Yes. Well, that sounds, or yes, or not going, or not subsiding. Then would that be the same thing? Rather than that energy.
Overlaying it with other things, you're
Yeah.
adding more energy.
Yeah.
Because you have the birds, then you have people talking, and then there's something
Yes. Sorry. Yes. In that way. Yes. Olga, sorry.
Well, I think there's we create a problem for ourselves sometimes in trying to draw a diagram, because immediately you see it in 2 dimensions, and as a sort of response to your wondering earlier on, to me it's a matter of depth. But you know, it's a deep. As we get smaller and smaller, it doesn't mean to say we get less deep.
Yeah.
Because it sort of gets deeper and deeper.
Yeah. And he's going to talk about that like a layered process, so that what is familiar to us is what's recent, and as it gets further away and more overlaid, it then becomes more and more difficult to access.
It's like a memory, isn't it, from the past? Suddenly something will trigger that memory to
Yes.
come back. You
Yeah.
see, you know, something happening, and you remember, oh, years ago, you know, that happened to me.
Yeah. True.
You've forgotten about it, but
Yeah.
it's suddenly there. It's all there in
Particularly
perfect
music.
lightness.
Particularly music. Takes,
Yeah.
And smells.
Yes.
Smell.
Alan, in the dictionary, irritability, just to go back to it,
Yeah.
of course it gives different definitions, but the simple one is sensitive to stimuli.
Right.
Just
Yes.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is the one which the biologists
Yeah.
want to keep
Yeah.
it at.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I suppose in that sense, we say to somebody, if we mean that somebody is particularly likely to respond in an irritable way, we say they're a sensitive person. In other words, you know, it's like,
More
yeah,
reaction.
tiptoe, they are sensitive. So we've given it a slant, you know, in that sense, that they are responsive rapidly. Right, I've forgotten where we are now.
That's with
Mimic. Yeah. You pull a face and say mimic. In recent experiments of the kind just mentioned, it is shown that the protoplasm of children at a very, very early stage from birth respond to stimuli and retain the impressions, and that subsequent ingoing stimuli are conditioned by those already received. This is the basis of the conditioning process. Okay, I'm going to say that again. In recent experiments of the kind just mentioned, it is shown that the protoplasm of children at a very, very early stage from birth respond to stimuli and retains the impressions, and that subsequent ingoing stimuli are conditioned by those already received. That's what we've said before, just now. This is the basis of the conditioned process. Less popularly understood is the fact that this same egg, which is developed into a child, was already sensitive before it had altered its form from the egg into the embryo. All protoplasm is human protoplasm, is the original protoplasm, is not something different from the original derived from it. It is the original protoplasm continued by division through successive generations. And consequently, if we start with any given egg, we can go back to the 2 ancestors of this egg, continuously multiplying on the way back. Or a way he said it more precisely than that is, you got your protoplasm as living tissue from your mum and dad, who got it from their 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 mum and dad. You've never been died. That living tissue has never died, ever. So you are part of a vast living protoplasm. And it's the same protoplasm that you got from your parents, etc. In fact, he once said to me that if they didn't cut the umbilical cord, we'd see this wonderful woven pattern. And we all went back.
Mind boggles.
Yes, the mind boggles.
Difficult to get on the bus.
I think buses would be a thing of the past. Yeah. Yeah. All right. It is original protoplasm continued by division through successive generations, and consequently, if we start from any given egg, we can go back to the two ancestors of this egg, continuously multiplying on the way back. And this way, we would get more ancestors than we have descendants. Okay? Were it not for the fact that at a certain point we discover that intermarriages occur back. And the triangle begins to narrow, and we come back to the one protoplasm from which all human beings started. Right. This is amazing, but I once did this with a circle, just as a pattern for a piece of artwork. If you get you've got 2 parents, you've got 4 grandparents, you've got 8 great-grandparents, you've got 16 great-grandparents. Very quickly, you've got a hell of a lot of ancestors. So that there's a guy called Guy Murky, and he's got a wonderful book out called The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and he takes this and he runs with it. I remember I did a thing called The Garden once, many years ago, and what he actually says is, if you take that back, within 1,000 years, you're actually related to all the human beings on the planet, all of them, because they've all tipped into the gene pool. We know this because we find chromosomes from sort of Irish sailors in Australia in Aboriginal family. You know, there's no trace of it, but we can find the DNA has actually got this written into it. So that literally the whole world seems to, in terms of humans, swap a chromosome every 1,000 years. So it's like if you like, a ripple that goes right through all of us and keeps us unified, so that we are not racially different or nationally different in any way. This thing sweeps through us all. Go back 2,000 years and it's happened even more so. He then sort of extrapolates this even further and says, yes, but if you keep going back, you find that, and you can talk in terms of great-great-grandparents or second cousins to everybody on the planet in 1,000 years back, when there was a very small population, by the way, you know, a much smaller population. You're related to all of them, and you could actually calculate you're probably something like a 200th cousin to them. But then he says the bigger picture is you're something like a 8 millionth cousin to the gorilla. You're. I was getting there.
Couldn't resist it.
It goes right back into the literally, because you can go back along the evolutionary track like this as to when we branched off, and you can work out how many ancestors you've got common to an elephant, to a cabbage. You know, you can go back further. If you go further enough back, you are a second cousin, many times removed, literally to the planet. And when did the planet separate from the great? He takes it, the whole thing right back, and then just sort of says, because of this outgrowing from an internal point that I mentioned at the beginning, that process is fascinating to look at. So you're related to not just human beings, but everything on the planet. Yes.
In Theosophy, probably Madame Blavatsky, didn't she say that consciousness and the consciousness that we now have today has existed from right back to mineral, through to plant, through to animal, through to man? Well, she first of all said that consciousness is in everything.
Yes.
But we ourselves have traversed through, which is basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
In a way.
In a cellular level.
Yeah.
They're still talking about the cells in this point.
Yeah.
What Halliday's talking about at this moment is the fact that that triangle he's saying, which is expanding constantly, literally doubling exponentially as it goes back a generation, very rapidly, within about sort of 500 or 600 years, you're related to everybody in Britain. Because there weren't that many people. The population was then about 6,000 or 7,000, I think. So what's actually happened is some of these people have married other ancestors.
Ah, right.
So as your ancestors go back in a widening triangle, you find that it crosses over with your mums and dads, and that you're sharing a lot of common ancestors. So you can see that this is why we tend to look a lot like the people from our country. And we tend to look a lot like people from our district, etc. It spreads out, it's less and less. But we have sort of nationalistic breakdown because we are sharing genes with these people more frequently in that sense. So this is literally how it's happening. But we never lose contact because we're of the same species. What the word means with species is we can still have children together. So we know that we are the same species. And then while that is happening, we are still swapping genetic information between us. When we stop doing that, then we become a separate branch. And we can no longer share genes across. Okay? It happens slowly, but if you look at things like donkeys and horses, they've just separated. So you can get a mule from a donkey and a horse, but the mule cannot then reproduce. Okay? So that these things are actually, when they stop reproducing together, they become a separate branch and start to develop in a different way. Although very similar. Okay? Right. Back to the text. We're on page 6. This is a very dense one, rapidly. It starts to become a bit more direct now, because we're going through a lot of information. So the reason why that means that you're related very rapidly to, you've got more ancestors than there are people in Britain, for instance, is because obviously some of those ancestors of yours intermarry. So in other words, the two sides of your mother and father have been married before, so that the families have interrelated before, as you go further and further back. And the triangle begins to narrow, and we come back to the one protoplasm from which all human beings started. Now, if we like to think of the generations of protoplasm as simply the layer experiences of one human protoplasm, we can see that in each generation there is a layer of experience. Okay? So you say mums and dads and baby, grandparents and baby, great-grandparents and baby. We've got layers of an onion, if you like. Okay? Layer of experience. And this has to do with the intensity and the duration of the original stimulus. Imagine for a moment that we have an egg here, and we subject this egg to a mild electric shock. A mild one that just makes it feel slightly unpleasant. And we put it only on for 1/10 of a second. There's a little ripple through it. It starts to contract, but the stimulus switches off and it quickly returns to its normal position. But inside it there's now a motion, a shadow motion going through it from this little electric shock. Now that motion can never cease as long as that protoplasm exists. And it would condition our behaviour all the time if it were not for the overlaying of this mild stimulus by others, less mild. Supposing the next one is very violent. Now we get a very strong reaction. And this one, when we look at the drawing, if we don't know that we already have a shadow ripple in it, which we actually saw being drawn here, a quick look at that and we might think, oh, these are the only marks that there are in this cell, and the paper looks a bit dirty elsewhere. Now these very strong waves, these very strong alternate contractions and expansions of the protoplasm, overlay in stimulus value the other stimulus below. But if we take away this strong stimulus after a minute, then these strong ones begin to subside again, and they can fall down to the level, providing we don't re-stimulate them, they can fall down to the level of intensity nearly like the other ones. So what he's saying is, to go back to this original diagram, these stimuli, which set the whole motion pattern vibrating, are retained inside this like shadows of movement, very vaguely. the more recent stimuluses, or the intense stimuluses, like say life-threatening stimuluses, will write themselves on very strongly over the top. And relative to those, these original ones seem like just shadows or bits of darker tissue. And these become less available to us as an experience because they haven't got the stimulus value of this thing that happened last Saturday when you nearly lost your life, or happened 3 or 4 years ago, which was life-threatening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So what he's saying is that the original ones don't go away, they're still there. But what's happened is the more recent ones and the intense ones overlay them, so they makes them less accessible to us.
They're still there underneath.
Yes. And that means if you work on making these ones subside, then you've got access to the ones underneath. If you can in some way. Pardon?
They're like records. They are
Yes.
records.
Yes.
Another way of putting it.
So if you still yourself, like a meditative process, what you're literally allowing yourself to do is allowing those things to go. If you go in for the stillness, you're going in for the less accessible ones. And you're tuning yourself down to pick up vibrations which are more of a sensitive level. And that we can tune ourselves is the human experience. That we can work on that. We don't have to suffer that as, if you like, a ragbag of information which we've been given and which has been passed into us. We can deal with it. We can choose to overlay it. You know? And sometimes we have to, because it's extremely dangerous to obey one very dominating stimulus, because it can easily drive us into a false situation. You know, we can overreact to, like, a friend of mine was telling me he's bought a Citroen, and one of the things he really liked about it, it's got a chrome steering, a chrome gear lever, and he thought this was wonderful until he went to Spain on his holidays and jumped in, put his hand on it to change gear, lost all the skin. So, I mean, yes, if he'd have been, he couldn't be driving without having put it in gear, so he would notice that. But you can imagine if you get stung while you're driving, by trying to get rid of the bee, you can cause a major accident. You know, if you spill boiling water on your leg, you can actually overreact and pour the rest of it all over you if you're not careful. So it's very, very important for us to be able to, it's a measure of intelligence that we can literally hold down very strong stimulus, so that we can control ourselves in situations where we know that the immediate sensation is to drop something or to run away or to do something stupid or something more dangerous, in other words.
Are we to assume that the stimulus that has been repressed is continuing at the same intensity as it was when it was first experienced?
Now, he hasn't said that yet,
Yeah.
but I'm assuming that it is. Literally, but we are not experiencing it in the same way because we have overlaid it. But later on he will say that you can re-ectorize that, you can actually re-experience it, and when you do, you're going to actually find it intensely experienceable, if you like, if there's a word, experienceable. Now this is interesting because while I was running up to doing this talk, literally hot off the presses on Wednesday night, I was reading a book of essays by a fellow called Alan Garner, local boy, did well, okay. The book is called The Voice That Thunders, okay.
Sorry, I couldn't see and I couldn't hear.
The Voice That Thunders.
Voice that thunders. Thank you.
It's lectures that he's given to various people, and I was lying in bed reading it, because my wife had told me I should read it, because it's holiday reading and it's relaxing. And there's one inside called Inner Time, and it was given in 1975 to the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London, and the theme was science fiction. And Garner was talking about it, and he mentions that literally this important word engram, and the fact that he was taken back into a situation by a fellow you may have heard called Bill Wadsworth, and that he literally experienced again a situation. Now this is a fascinating one, because what was happening is he'd written a story about something which had been bugging him, or he felt was very important. Somebody had similarly got in touch with this idea and thought it would make a good TV program, was turning it into a TV program. He was having horrendous problems with the actors. Really, he was going to rehearsals, he was going to the filming, and he was having very, very bad reactions to what he was seeing. Now what was going on was the fact that, as far as it's been explained, is that he was seeing people acting out the situation that had really bothered him in his childhood. Long overlaid. He didn't know why it was happening, but he was having extreme angry responses to one of the actors. He couldn't be in his company, and he was having physical symptoms, dizziness, aches, pains all over his body, to prevent him from getting to the rehearsals and to the filming. So what was going on was literally he was experiencing in real time something which was very, very painful from his past. And this was literally making him play it again. So it's a fascinating little aspect. Yeah. But what he's actually saying, Ron, is that it is in real time. So when you get back to it, if you do it, you know, with any sensitivity, you'll get the full whack of that situation as if it was going on here and now. And that's why he calls it inner time. That the inner time, is what Halliday's saying here, you have got all that going on inside of you. It's not that you've inherited this protoplasm, it's the same bloody protoplasm. So the memories are your memories, and they're very intense. If you can get through the overlaying and take yourself back into them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that gives us an incredible tool for working problems out and for also understanding ourselves.
The bit that Eugene used to talk about is the observer is not the observed, it's that free bit that can overcome us.
Yes.
Sometimes, by some people.
Yes. And that is literally the one tool that makes all this possible. I mean, for a long time, we're abstracting to say that, you know, the pure observer, but it will probably be one motion pattern looking at another motion pattern for a long time. But with refinement, hopefully we will get to a state where we're not in a motion pattern and we're seeing things clearly. Because for most of us, we'd have to say that there are wars going on inside us because we've got certain motion patterns of behaviour which are clashing with other ones that we've always also had put into us. So if you're, for instance, your mother and father had horrendous arguments, you've still got those arguments going on inside that have not quite yet been resolved, you know.
But just
Steady dear, not in front of the children.
just to clarify, does that, I don't know what I'm trying to say, does that mean we've inherited all the, that from way back, from forever?
Yes.
Yeah.
He hasn't put any limitation on it yet.
Okay. So that's going to make things in terms of, I'm thinking in terms of like therapy, engram work, that would make it more difficult because you may be being influenced by stuff that happened literally generations and generations ago.
Mm-hmm.
Would we not all be told?
Yeah. Isn't there a sort of boundary here between, you know, cellular memory and physical memory?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because, you know, if you're remembering your parents, you know, that's going to be more a physical memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you've experienced it,
Right.
rather than a cellular memory, which is
Yeah.
inherited.
Mm-hmm. Direct experience, you mean that you've actually seen them and heard them.
Right, yes.
But
Yeah.
you've also got them before you separated off, is what Halliday's also saying. So you've literally shared their protoplasm.
Yeah.
So you may have, he's suggesting And of course, you don't have to believe it. What you have to do is just listen and then see what from this you're going to take away. He's saying you've got that same protoplasm inside. If it does still have memory, as he's saying, it would be accessible.
Yeah.
And therefore, if people can, and there are recorded people who have gone back and seen memories of situations. I mean, Freud used to take people back in utero.
Yeah.
Jung used to take them back into parents, as far as I record. We have a young specialist here. Is that right, Ron? He used to take people back to mums and dads. Yeah, Halliday's saying, why stop there?
Yeah. It's like past life regression, isn't it?
Yes. And an awful lot of people who, when they literally went into these flotation tanks and were left in situations with no stimulus whatsoever, after a couple of hours, they were seeing all sorts of things which they were reporting when they came out. Without any stimulus, without anybody taking them back through in regression, hypnotic regression, they just literally relax deeply. And if you relax deeply, you find that this stuff comes up, you know. What I find fascinating with the Ghana thing is we've got somebody, a very good writer, who can actually describe the situation very well, who's saying clearly that his inspiration literally was a past memory, a problem that he hadn't dealt with. And when he looks in the situation, he looks back and sees that he'd written several stories. It's about a bus stop, would you believe? Buses, you see. That he'd written several stories about buses. In fact, there's a bus stop in every one of his stories. It's like Ian McEwan. Did anybody read the thing about that he wrote in the Times about, must be about 5 years ago? Oh, it's wonderful. He's a total atheist, and he suddenly came across a ridiculous situation. He was born during the war. During the war, his mother had an illegitimate child and had farmed the child off to someone else. This is from memory of 5 years ago. I've got the article so I can actually get it back for you. He wrote it in the Times, and he said, until his mother died, he didn't realise that there was another child in the family. And that when he did discover it, he went back, found him. He was a butcher in the East End. The fella sort of was fine, etc. So they actually told him what had happened, that his mother had literally given the child away and carried on, pretended it hadn't happened. Her husband had come back from the war, had him and one or two sisters, etc. When she dies, it all comes out. He goes back and finds the brother, goes home, sits down and thinks, every story I've written has got a family in which there's a hidden secret that nobody knows about. And he said every story he'd written is about that. And he didn't consciously know anything about it. But unconsciously, he had picked this up. So again, when you get somebody of that status who's actually sort of saying, look at what I call inspiration, or my body of work, is based on literally a traumatic situation that I was unconscious of and yet picked up. Because this happened before I was born, but in my family, resonating in some way. Spooky. Okay. I've got the article, so if anybody wants it, if they give me their email, I can bang it to them. It's literally photocopied off the Times. Because it was very interesting because he just had no way of explaining it, but he said, if you look back at my oeuvre, if you like, what's the film? And V and I had just seen the film, which has got Keira Knightley in. What's it one that?
Atonement.
Atonement. The title gives it away. And and what Garner's saying is exactly the same thing, that what we think of as inspiration, what moves us in that sense, is literally part of this process of how we're made up. Supposing the next stimulus is very violent, now we get a very strong reaction. And this one, when we're looking at the drawing, if we don't know that we already have a shadow ripple in it, which we actually saw being drawn here, a quick look at it and we might think, oh, these are the only marks there in this cell, and the paper looks a bit dirty elsewhere. Now these are very strong waves, and these strong alternative contractions and expansions of the protoplasm overlay in stimulus value the other stimulus below. But if we take away the strong stimulus after a minute, then these strong ones begin to subside below. Sorry, but if we take the stimulus a minute, then these strong ones begin to subside again, and they can fall down to the level, providing we don't re-stimulate them, they can fall down to the level of intensity nearly like the other ones. I think he's describing the process of meditation. This is what happens during dreams. When your external strong stimulus, the material environment is reduced. You cut down the light stimulus, you go into a darkened room, you make your body comfortable, you relax it, you try to cut down on all the stimuli from outside, and this causes a general lapsing down to a threshold level of all the records, all the stimuli you've had. Now if, when you're in that state of total, nearly equal stimulation, not quite equal, that's impossible, nearly equal, if then a horn blows in the distance and the sound comes from the window, that horn sound stimulates some already existing patterns within and lifts those up into consciousness, and this re-ekphorized mnemic pattern is a dream. Okay? So what he's saying, and what I think you were going to formulate as a question, was that if we have got so many memories inside us, how the hell can you possibly deal with this life that we're living? Because there's so many things going on inside us. What I think he would say is that people don't present problems like that. They present a problem that everyday life is actually making them focus on at any given point. So that for Alan Garner, he's got a play which is causing him real problems. For McEwen, he's got a family situation that is causing him real problems. He doesn't present with the whole recorded problems of human history. He records with the one which is being stimulated at the moment. Okay? So that for us as human beings, we are being presented with a problem, and this comes into the thing, the sort of truism that people say, you're never presented with a problem that you can't deal with. This is what spiritual people say. They want to see some of my problems. I haven't. But what that means is that literally something is being called from us to deal with this situation in the world around us now. It is calling up a particular response from us. And this is something which we maybe need really to look at to complete our processes, because it's something which we're lacking or that we haven't quite seen properly yet.
Re-ekphorized, please.
Yes, please.
Okay, it's on my little notes. If it's on, sorry, if you look at my notes, it tells you. Right. It's the second one, ekphori. A term, ekphori, is based on a Greek word meaning to be made known, and was first introduced by Richard Semon in 1904.
Wow.
Isn't he wonderful?
So read
A long time ago.
Yeah. In other words, BuzzFeed means made known again. Halliday's the only one I'd ever heard use that word, so it was interesting. But it does have a history. Okay. Mnemic is literally to do with memory.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So a mnemic pattern is a dream. So our dreams, if you like, are woven together out of memories that we've had or that our ancestors have had. He is saying. That's why in the very beginning he said, like the falling dream is a memory that we've had ancestrally.
I'm now getting confused by what you're saying is actual memory and cellular memory.
I'm not making a difference between either, between them. At this point, neither is he, I would say. He's still treating it as if it was a physical manifestation of vibrating water, vibrating fluid, vibrating protoplasm. That it isn't something which... What is important here that makes it protoplasm is the protoplasm experiences it as a memory trace. But the vibration is still there as a physical, tangible thing inside. So we're still not even talking about brains yet, I don't think, in that sense. So I keep it as just literally a vibrational thing which has been stored in terms of a vibrating body. Now if we imagine, just after where it says 13.57, the paragraph starts with now, and we're about halfway down page 3. Now if we imagine that all the experiences are nearly down to the same level, then the thing that determines what we will dream is the character of the stimulus hitting the whole complex. Now in the same way, when we come to examine our own experiences and our parents, our immediate parents, if we can cut down on the immediate stimulation in our own body, we can begin to become aware of our father's and mother's experiences. This is not a matter of theory, it's a matter of daily experimental fact. And when we push a person back into early childhood, and then into the early prenatal zone, we can, by a series of verbal stimuli, reactivate certain early phases, and from these trigger back, until finally the person is reading the record of his own mother and father. He can recapture verbal phrases. He can see the scenes that they saw, see the clothes they wore, and so on. Because the protoplasm we are examining is the protoplasm which was the parent's body. Now we don't have to go very far. It's really disturbing and surprising this. I took a school party for my sins on a barren Sunday to Movama. This is what we had to do. I was a teacher in a prep school. So we went to Movama, and I was lying on the rest of the kids are playing rounders and football and things. I was working hard. And I nearly died because over the hill came a phalanx of Roman soldiers. Now my first thought, I'd read stories like this, was literally to pinch myself. And the kids are also Roman soldiers. So we go across, and of course it's reenactment people, you know. Now, it was really impressive. I mean, very impressive. The guy who was the sergeant at arms looked like a tank with the full kit on. Now, when you realise they knit their own chainmail, they make the spears, they've researched everything down to the socks that they would have worn because they were in Britain. You're standing with these characters whose life is totally dominated by being a Roman soldier. And if you've read this lecture, you then think, what's going on here? Because his wife comes as well, and she makes Roman food. You know, it's the back of a minivan, but they're all dressed as soldiers, and their wives and their kids. We have the Viking guys that come to Hoylake, where we used to live, and they tell you how many calories the Vikings must have lived on, etc. And the food, and they make the food, the porridge that they used to eat, 6 times a day they had to eat to withstand the cold where they live in Norway, etc. The clothes that they make, and they've done this even down to they've copied out the books that we've got from Viking days. Now you're sitting there, you're thinking to yourself, either this is some weird thing, or these people have in some way responded. They've gone right back. They've tuned into something. They found a thread. But then I've worked in theatre, costume job. Where the hell is the costume job? Some people love costume job. They love the period, no matter what the play is. You know, you literally get caught on the costume, and you're sitting there, and it's very, very easy to get in. Our memories seem to know the rightness or the wrongness of the situation. It's fascinating. But if you do ever go to a reenactment, and go along and just see how totally absorbed they are in it. Well, my daughter took us to an American Civil War one, which was fascinating because they had the whole of camp followers. They had the chuck wagon, they had the food, everything was laid out. They were firing blanks, which were exactly the right size. They had cannon. You know, there were even people with horses there, with the full. Even the horses were just in the right gear. It is fascinating. You think, see, where the hell does this come from? You know, where the hell does this come from?
And the same with the Formula One.
Yes.
Formula One car racing
Yeah.
gets very absorbing for some people, doesn't it?
Yes, that's true. That hasn't got the historical aspect, but of course it's got some degree of historical aspect because, of course, there's racing cars right the way back. Is it time for a break, do you think?
Yeah.
Indeed.
Is it?
then the thing that determines what we will dream is the character of the stimulus hitting the whole. Is that the bit you meant? Or do you mean the
Did we
next
reach
one?
the end of that, or no? Oh, this is
No,
one.
that's
Oh,
it.
you're right.
We've done that.
Yes, we did do
Yeah,
it.
we read it.
We've read that,
We
yes.
did
Right, right, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
We'll do infinite intelligence.
The memory's gone.
Memory's gone.
Shall I have to try and find it?
Oh, it's
Sure, it's there somewhere, Sheila.
Yeah.
Well,
That was
we'll
a
do
long
the
time
next
ago.
bit,
They can't remember.
because the kettle hasn't boiled yet, so we'll do the next bit. Okay.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
To understand this properly is to understand the real meaning of reincarnation as opposed to some rather naive ideas of reincarnation. The resident nuclear intelligence is simply the intelligence of the infinite vibrating on this highly sensitive nuclear center. Now we're starting to zone it down. Okay? Up until this point, it's been literally bodily, if you like, or vibrational. The resident nuclear intelligence here, there, is simply the intelligence of the infinite vibrating on this highly sensitive nuclear center, and through that conditioning the surrounding plasma. But that intelligence is the infinite absolute intelligence that created the universe. And yet that same intelligence appears in the worm, and in the donkey, and in the man, and differs in them not only on account of itself as intelligence, but on account of the peculiar pattern of their bodies. Their bodies respond differently because they have different levels of organization. There is no evolution whatever of consciousness. Evolution is of form. The sensitive organism responds to the intelligence better than an insensitive one. The congenital idiot is just as intelligent behind his deficient body as the genius is with his efficient body. We must never think that one thing is more intelligent than another, but only that the vehicles of these beings differ so much that they filter this intelligence in different ways, in different degrees. And this is why all the holy traditions have a refinement going on. There is a discipline of refinement. They all talk about fasting, of diet, exercise, systems of prayer, methods of meditation, etc. To refine yourself, ways of behaving between people so that you don't grossly overlay yourself. Eugene once said to me, you've got to be careful that your soul doesn't become opaque. It has to be transparent. You have to be sensitive to things going on around you, so you make yourself more sensitive to emotional states in other beings. It's very, very debilitating at times because you feel other people's emotions quite strongly. But that's bound to happen when you make yourself sensitive. And that transparency is what you need. Most people are opaque. They have to be, to work in abattoirs and things. We do, to work literally with extreme loud noises is very, very difficult. You do have to literally make yourself sensitive. If we brought people from, the deepest, darkest jungles into the modern world, they find the sounds and the noises horrendous to deal with. I mean, V and I were in deep, darkest France a couple of weeks ago, and overnight, all you could hear were frogs in the distance. It's amazing. And the pitch dark, the blackness, the darkness, it was so calm and still. It's amazing, literally, the level of vibration. To literally deal with the modern world, I think we have to make ourselves, as you would say, opaque. Literally, we have to block out all this stuff which is coming at us all the time. Now here we have a human egg and it's going to develop. At each stage in its development, the nuclear intelligence, which is really the intelligence of the absolute, is working through to organize this protoplasm. It's going to make a human body. In each stage it has self-awareness. When it is in the stage of an egg, it feels like an egg, and the content of consciousness in that zone is egg-shaped. Prior to the process of mitosis, where it divides itself, it is entirely a rudimentary protopathic awareness. Protopathic is on your back page. It feels like a sphere, and this sphere is a sensitive sphere. It is not yet analyzed. It is a pre-analytic whole. It is not a synthetic, that means put together in pieces. Remember when I said you build a big figure out of adding arms and legs? Or you can pull them out of it. One's synthetic and the other one isn't. It's not a synthetic, it is not a synthetic whole, which implies analysis. It is a pre-analytic whole. Every human being has been an egg, has been in the protopathic state prior to cell division. And because of this irritability of the protoplasm, it retains within itself this pre-analytic whole consciousness. And this pre-analytic whole consciousness is the ground of its belief, which later is going to help it back to wholeness when it's lost it. Okay? That's not a bad answer to that question. Eugene, I saw this program. Okay? And the quality of those sentences is amazing. Query or...
We're assuming all will be revealed.
Yes, indeed. It's been muted that we're not going to get through this. We got through it at Channy Garth.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, but how long
It was a weekend.
Alan, would you be willing to do another session on this?
Oh yes, yeah. I don't know where we're going to get to, because in a sense that first part is highly technical.
Yeah.
And there's lots and lots of information coming at you quite powerfully. And Eugene's using that. He wants to get that inside you. Some of us have done it at school, some of us have done it in textbooks, etc. If you haven't done it at all, that's very dense information.
Yeah.
And it's really quite compact. It's 3 pages of really quite technical stuff if you've not come across it before. Now he's extrapolating from it. It's a little bit easier. This is more anecdotal, and this is... So we could flow quite a way through this. But I think certainly we could get another discussion from this. And if we did, I could bring the McEwen stuff and give you that an account of that article as well. So you've got, again, this sort of references. And lots of other things about people having spontaneous memories and projections of situations which they could not have had the information for, which seem to come to them. And these sort of things are fascinating. Someone only said the other day that they'd literally in a tremendous depression, they'd actually gone through the Mersey Tunnel. Understandable, triggers depression in most people. I think it's the fee when you pay to get to the other end. And come out at the other end, going into Liverpool and getting completely lost, and because of the period they were going through in their life, and finished up literally completely lost in a little back street, and couldn't go on at all. I closed the car, went to try and look for somebody, noticed that the street name rang a bell. It was the street that her mother was born in. She'd never been there before, and she'd just driven to it in a very depressed state, and she just suddenly realised, she just really felt that someone was looking after her. She parked in the street where her mother was born, never having been there. Now, of course, if you want to say scientifically what's going on there, well, coincidence, of course. Yeah. But lots of floods of tears, and from there she found her own way back to where she was going. She was going to somewhere in Liverpool which she'd never been, and the tunnel terrified her, and when she came out of the tunnel, I mean, if you don't know where you're going, it's horrendous. Right. So, yes, internal, I reckon we're on to internal self-contradiction. Oh no, we're not. Oh yes, we are.
This is turning into a pantomime. Behind you.
Right. Now, the nuclear intelligence, under the influence of absolute intelligence, here divides and puts a wall up. Now, Eugene entering with absolute intelligence is bringing in, if you like, an influence which would not be scientifically accepted. I accept it. You don't need to accept it, you don't need to believe it. There's wonderful stuff of working with Eugene's stuff. He used to say you don't have to believe this stuff. You don't have to accept it. What you have to do is just listen and allow it to work inside of you, because it changes the way you look at things, and it changes what comes at you. I mean, one of the things which I think is terribly powerful, I often quote, I had a friend who was a healer, who was having real trouble with the Christian church, the charismatic church in which he was working. And they were trying to throw him out because they didn't want to go and worship in this particular church. He was a very strong Christian, and he sorted it out. And I said to him, how did you sort it out? He said, well, the statement we agreed was that I would say, the more I pray, the more coincidences happen. And they could accept that, and I could accept that. He said, and that's what happens anyway. He said, I don't heal anybody, I just pray. And they get better, usually. He said, so I can't take any responsibility for it. Now, when I talk about the coincidences, literally, like finding that book, I didn't pick the book. V picked the book. I said, for God's sake, find me something to read in France. She found this book, which I hadn't read, about a subject which she thought I would be interested in. We went to France, never bothered to read it. I was reading it last week, literally.
Is this the German?
Yeah, no, this is the one,
The Alan Garner.
the Alan Garner
Voice
one,
that thunders.
which was here, and it's now
Here.
gone.
The Voice that thunders.
The Voice that Thunders. Now, when you read something like that, and you're doing a talk on ancestral influence, 4 days later, you feel that you should finish the article rather than fall asleep. So it's things like that which convince you that the universe is not purely scientific in its structure. It has other connections. So when he comes in and says that, I would now say, now as a young student, I would have balked at that and said, well, hang on, how can we nail that down? Now I don't bother. And that allowance, if you like, is something which I'm bringing to it, but you don't need to be able to go with the rest of the talk. Because the possibility allows for your mind just to loosen its edges, and to allow more information in. And you'll find that people will talk about things and you'll say, well, yes, that could be a coincidence, or it could actually be something resonating and that is drawing you into a situation. Very strange, but my uncle used to work for V's grandfather, which we didn't know. Yeah. So we were actually married when we found out that my uncle used to work. In fact, her family owes my family a finger, because he cut his finger off while he was working for them. We haven't had it back yet. Mhm. Yeah. My uncle was her grandfather's chauffeur.
It's the finger of fate.
The fickle finger. Yes, that's what I've called it on many occasions. Right, now here we're coming into, now the nuclear intelligence, under the influence of absolute intelligence, here divides and puts a wall up. As soon as that wall is put up, the content of consciousness, not the consciousness, the content is changed. It now has the whole awareness still enground on it. Still it is aware of wholeness. But it now has an awareness that there is a wall inside it. Now this is important stuff, because this is where he's describing how we experience ourselves while we are still consciousness. We don't experience the wholeness of it because we've accepting the walls, and the walls are dominating our experience of the situation rather than the infinite. And what I was suggesting about meditation before is you're feeling deeply into still centers in yourself to get beneath the divisions that we normally accept. So that when you go into a meditational state, instead of like a dream state where it's happening accidentally and stimulus is calling forward memory, you're trying to drop below all those memories and feel the wholeness underneath them. The turiya, if you like, the deep, relaxed openness of being. You need dream of Brahma. You're trying to drop right down beneath all those separations. Now here he's talking about how the separations get laid down inside us, the walls that we build up, even at a very basic cellular level. So let me go through that again. And remember, he's talking about we as infinite intelligence, infinite universal awareness, become limited into just feeling that we are trapped little awareness inside this body. Remember him saying once, actually at Parkland, that consciousness is like light. And one of the bulbs could go out, but it is still light. We talk about light, and we talk about the light, and we are in the same sense. We are a conscious light, and we're all bulbs, if you like, but the light that expresses itself through us is a unity. It's a wholeness, and we're just partly reflecting that infinite consciousness in ourselves. Now, the nuclear intelligence under the influence of absolute intelligence here divides and puts a wall up. As soon as that wall is put up, the content of consciousness, not the consciousness, the content is changed. It now has the whole awareness still enground on it. Still it is aware of a wholeness, but it now has an awareness there is a wall inside it. And it has an awareness of the stages of separation of the nucleus, and it has an awareness that this part is giving orders, and this part is giving orders, each of the nuclei, but the orders on each side are shielded by the wall. So we immediately have a possibility of a conflict within a being. Quite apart from any external thing, the being can fight itself. Wherever there is a cell with a nucleus, and that nuclear intelligence can give orders, there is the possibility that the orders of those cells will not coincide. So we can say immediately that on the appearance of the first division within the egg, we have the possibility of an internal conflict, of self-contradiction, and John's put in here, self-contradiction, allowing that the cell is the centre of that self. The old original word for a cell is a separation, a walled off place in which you can be just alone, yourself. You know, whether that's enforced upon you or whether it's chosen. You know, whether you're a prisoner in a cell or you're a monk or a nun inside a cell, whether it's chosen or it's still a place you can actually separate yourself off and be personally a cell. I remember saying to him one day about the unity of the being, and he said it has to be based on a hierarchy. There has to be a part which is ordering. And I said, well, why is that? He said, well, what are you interested in? And I said, I'm interested in art and painting and teaching art and stuff. He said, okay. So if you go to London, which strangely enough I'd been about a month before, and you want to walk around all the galleries, how do your feet feel about that? So, who makes the decision? If your feet make the decision, how many galleries do you get around? You know? Simple. Yes, okay. So yes, there's part of me which is organises me, and which overrides the feet when they, you know, okay, I might wear sandals or soft shoes, or I might sit down for a coffee or something like that, but essentially I'm going to get through 5 galleries or whatever it was. Yeah? And that means that we are structuring. There is an ordering process inside us which makes a decision and contradicts other aspects of you. So yes, you're going to get tired and you're going to use this part of you and overuse it perhaps, but you're not going to overuse it and damage it and destroy the vehicle, but you are going to make it stretch itself so that you can do other things which are better for the whole being. Now in the Bible, this wall building is called Simeon and Levi. It says Simeon and Levi dig the wall to their own hurt. They slew a man. The man they slew is this egg. They slew him, they killed him, they deaded him or divided him by putting up a wall inside. This breaks the original, non-synthetic, pre-analytical unity. Okay?
Well,
hang on just a second, because there's a strange thing there. When they say they dig the wall, any of you who've worked with agriculturists will know that the original walls, there's a piece of land, okay? If you want to separate this bit of land from your neighbour's land, you dig a wall. You literally dig a ditch and you throw the soil up and make a wall. It's like a sine wave. Okay, so when he says they dig the wall, they dig down there and they throw the mound up here, and you get a separation between my land and his land. Okay, it's a division, and this was going on all over the primitive world. It's still going on all over primitive Wales at the moment.
Offers Dyke.
Pardon?
Offers Dyke.
Offers Dyke, yes. And in that process, it's like a sine wave. It's literally, you know, you're making a separation, a distinction in a field, literally in a field. And that's what, so in this Simeon and Levi process, they're dividing a field of awareness, just like a farmer divides a field from his neighbour. Okay? And suddenly you're separate. Sorry, you had a question for it.
well, I was only going to say that, you know, that little remark was just flown out lightly about how the Bible could be taken, that Simeon and Levi build a wall, and And that suggests that the whole of the Bible, to Eugene, has got another
Meaning.
level of meaning.
Yes.
And just recently, I've been, quite absorbed in looking at things on YouTube to do with Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, these
Mhm.
brilliantly eloquent atheists expressing the ridiculousness, for instance, of the Old Testament and so on, and how anyone could possibly believe it.
Yes.
I mean, I do believe in God, I'm not saying that, I do, but I do find that, fascinating, watching these very intelligent men debating with religious people, and now you think the Bible, they're using it as on just the level it's being written about.
Yeah.
And somebody like Eugene is saying that the intelligence behind guiding the Bible is of a completely different level, but he's only using that.
Mhm.
They're saying, so presumably this, couple of people wandering around the Garden of Eden, this good-looking couple that,
Yeah.
whereas it doesn't mean that at all. It's not literal.
Yes. So it is in that sense, it's assuming and giving a meaning to it, which is, if you like, beyond the meaning that is particularly, actually, distinctly, overtly put forward as a story, like Noah and the Ark. Now, when you talk to Eugene like that, he would say there'd be many different meanings of that, and he classed himself as a hermeneut, someone who interprets scriptures and religious ideas not for the true level. He said, we're not talking about truth, we're talking about the best interpretation for a human being. Not the true one, because they're all true.
But it's
The best one.
But it's got to matter whether the person who wrote it had that in mind, hasn't
Well,
it?
did McEwan know what he had in mind when he wrote those stories about families with people missing? Or did it write itself through him? Was there just information that wanted to get known, and
Well,
it just used him?
Even if the Bible was written through these people,
Yes.
From some higher intelligence,
Mhm.
that's the crucial part, isn't it? In Eugene taking the Bible and reading it and saying, this thing about the wall could mean this, and giving it this meaning.
Mhm.
Did the intelligence mean it to mean that?
He would say yes. All the meanings, including the one that the most mundane preacher gets, is a meaning level, and it's true at a certain level. And all the other levels of meaning are also true, and will be true when you get there and you understand them. Because there's literally a hierarchical structure of that information, and what you find, what you're ready for, is the one that comes to you. So the word of a hermeneut is to interpret it to the best one for a human being. So if you read that and you think it's actually what it's talking about is agrarian policy in Israel, and we can count, we can discard it on the table. You're not getting the most juice out of that piece of writing that I've just given you. So we can talk about it, and we can actually give it a symbolic reference.
I think the problem is with the word truth, and people assume you can know a truth. Now, I don't believe that's possible. For about 2 years I couldn't say the word truth, it always came out as truth.
Right?
Yeah, and it's the way I always played the violin. I can't ever say I ever played it.
Right. Can you feel
And
it?
also with poetry, I just sit down with a piece of paper, I have no idea at all what's coming out. All I do is not interfere with it if I can.
You can't make it happen though,
No.
can you? Because same happens in art, visual art.
When I first started writing poetry, I was absolutely staggered, because I knew I didn't know things like this.
Yes. Yeah. And that is the true interpretation of the word inspiration. It means it's blown in. Inspiration, the spire part means blow. It's blown into you. So there's no reason that you could claim any meaningful ownership of it. So when you see an artist or a playwright or whatever crowing on about how they create these things.
But when you think of, for instance, the Jewish people thinking that Moses trekked through miles of wilderness, led by God, leading the people, hope I've got this right, to a place that, they say this is our land. And so now they can say, we were given this land, now this is our land. Was it meant like that, or was that meant some entirely different thing altogether?
Well, you've got different levels of that particular truth, and certainly there is a great sort of belief in that story which you've just said, which gives them a unity and gets this group of people who have, if you like, common ancestors in that sense, and forms them into a group of people which become a nation. And the word nation means of common birth, that's what it means. So in forming them, those stories create a Jewish people. Without the Bible, they've nothing to hold them together.
No.
So if you give people stories like this, so that when you find a nation like Germany or like Italy becoming formed, and they've only been formed for just about 150 years, they invent stories to give themselves a back history. And then in that sense, then you've got a story which binds us together. We're the people that did this and did that.
And also to justify their past misdemeanours as well.
Yes.
I mean, they went and slaughtered who were people living in the promised land before the
Well, the Canaanites were
Canaanites, that's right, yeah. So they went in and they slaughtered every man, woman and child.
Because they were worshipping false gods, according to them.
But they were also told that God had told them to go in and do that.
Yes.
So it's like, it's back creating a history to justify. It wasn't us, it was God that told us to go in there. And it's justification for your past.
You're actually half-hearted, Mark. He had also said kill the goats and the sheep as well.
And woe betide you if you leave any of them.
Absolutely.
If you spare any.
And all the violence, war that it's led to, you know, and the division between the Islam.
It didn't lead to war and violence. People were having wars and violence long before. It was just the present excuse, the recent excuse.
Eugene said, I think it was Eugene, that every statement in the Bible was contradicted somewhere else in the Bible.
Yeah.
So that actually you have no justification for using it to justify anything that you do.
Absolutely.
Perhaps look at the opposites like Jacob Brown.
Sounds like you.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you also need the furniture of idea structures like that to make references. The stories help us to refer to things, so that we can say that, you know, that person, he's a real Uriah. Now, if you don't know the stories, you can't actually place them. And if you do, you've got literally a whole vocabulary that people are missing. You know, you do find a lot of children coming through now who don't know about Noah's Ark and stuff. And don't know simple things. I got in a class once, I mentioned the chimney, and they all sort of said, what's a chimney? And then the other one is I mentioned the wireless. You know, can you imagine talking about
Videos now. Apparently they don't know what videos are.
So the world moves on very rapidly, but you do need this furniture to be able to discuss ideas with, which is why I think someone like Shakespeare, etc., and Dickens, and because most of us are common with the stories, we can bounce quite refined ideas off each other by just mentioning people's character names and storylines. You know, which is what the Bible
Fortunately, that's not doing any harm, because we just know it's Dickens and Shakespeare. But when it's supposed to be God, it can cause, and has done, the most terrible harm. Like, you know, just can't quite remember now, but Abram's legitimate son and his illegitimate son being the start of the Ishmael and the Islamic thing, and the hatred there is now about who's right and who's wrong.
I don't think that's just is caused by the story, though.
Well, it's formed the two nations, hasn't it? They feel they have a right to the same land. And Jerusalem's ours. No, it's ours.
And the Christians are involved in that as well, because they think it's ours.
Yes, you know, so why
that's the fault of the people, not the fault of the story.
Don't forget it was the French, the Americans and the English who created the current problems there.
Yes, but all I mean is then somebody comes along and says, oh, it doesn't really mean that anyway.
Well, what it means is, it's actually an abstraction.
Yeah, 1940.
We haven't discussed it yet, because it's behind all the things you just mentioned. Because you can't, until you get a separateness like that, you cannot get an individual development. You need, in some form of separation, to give that, literally the pulling away, for those things to specialise, as they do inside the body. If we'd stayed as single cells,
for that.
We would have to have stayed in the ocean.
Yeah.
That specialisation of the different organs that we've got inside us, which is a ruthless specialisation and an intense definition of those particular structures. I've got parts inside of me which only deal with urine, which only deal with other chemistry. And they're so specifically, now we would not have created them if we hadn't have separated them. If all those cells had said, oh no, I'm free, I want to float through the ocean, picking plankton. We've literally intensely gathered them together, and I've very selfishly wrapped them in skin, and you poisoned it with all sorts of horrendous things. They have to work like hell. My lungs have to process so much oxygen to keep the rest of these cells down here. We didn't get any. I didn't have these bellows to actually push on. So I've done these horrendous things to these poor cells. They're all inside there. They're like my slaves, thinking, when are we going to get free? When's he going to die so we can go back to being slime?
Don't
Like we
even
used to
mention
be.
mitochondria, because mitochondria, well, okay.
Yeah.
You know.
So,
They only pass down the female line, so where do they come into it?
well,
They were separated.
yes,
as always,
I got
weren't
some
they?
as well. I got some from my mum.
Yes, I know, but that's just it.
Yes.
You didn't get it from your dad.
No. So that separation, that intense, is terribly important to create the intelligence that we have now. That constant battling and fighting is one of the ways in which self-definition comes about. Now, I don't think it has to be as intense as that, but wherever you've looked, what actually seems to formulate and push human beings forward is strife. As much as anything else, Heraclitus said that. Strife is the great educator in nature. But as Eugene used to say, if it wasn't for sharks, all the other fish would swim very slowly. So, yes, that strife builds us the way we are. And we have to be grateful for that edge. Eugene also said, which was fascinating in one conversation, he was saying if you look at the development of language, the people who are making language are the ones who are in the most dangerous situation. He said during the war, it was the fellas who were literally on the front line. And he said now it's the drug dealers and the gangsters which write the words. They create the words. Because literally you have to reformulate situations and you have to be on the edge and need a word rapidly to condense the situation. They produce the most of it. Not the only ones. We all coin words and we change words and we distort them. Like the scientists have taken the word irritability, or rather taken it back to its original Greek, to use it in a specific way. We do this in that sense. We take a simple word. Pardon?
Do you mean like street language that got drug
Yes,
dealers?
but all language like that is created like that. And we use it because it separates people. I've just been talking that to somebody, which is Mr. Stephen Pinker actually defined how we do this. We use language to separate ourselves from in-groups and out-groups, which is in the Bible. It's the story of Shibboleths, when King David said, when we capture the Samaritans, they'll pretend to be Israelites, but they can't say their THs. So we asked them to say a word with TH in it, and if they can't say it, we kill them. So it's a way of actually, and this is what Stephen Pinker says we do all the time. We actually separate ourselves off. As soon as we hear a vowel drop, we think, no, they're not in. We'll have these people, they've got the right inflection. We do it constantly. And he said it builds tribes within tribes within tribes, jargons, you know. When I used to be in the GPO, we used to talk in acronyms, you know. I was a T2O.
What?
A T2O, technical training officer. So, and we just used to talk in that all the time, and literally, it's stupid, but it separates you from other people. This is what happens with language. And the Bible actually has all these things written in, not in that they knew the things that Pinker was going to say about gossip and how it formulates boundaries, but it's happening because human beings have recognized these things and describe it in a story. So if you can't capture it in a definition, which we do scientifically, prior to that we will write about it in a story. And you know, you'll find that in things like Shakespeare and Dickens, you'll find he's formulated an awful lot of literally social and moral responsibility with Dickens. You know, he didn't actually say we should look after these poor people. He wrote a damn story in which if you don't look after these poor people, horrendous things happen. You know? and people were desperate to read them and to identify with them. And social work in London and in New York and stuff started to increase because of writing of people like Dickens and stuff. Very effective. Yeah, Oscar Wilde said nobody cleared the whores and the street people off the streets in London as well as Jack the Ripper did. He said within 2 months there were all sorts of church groups moving into the area. Yeah, strife. It creates tension in the situation, makes you conscious. Eugene actually said that consciousness is not the same as awareness or sentiency. Consciousness has got an edge. You're very conscious of something where you've got an edge where two things meet. So if you're conscious of sitting, it's because you can feel your bottom, or your bottom meets chair. Okay? Or inside you feel bone against flesh, or at skin surface you feel air against skin. Consciousness is made an awareness of separation. The she in consciousness is the same as the she in scissors. Is to do with the fact that you're separating, you're dividing a space. It means with separation awareness. And so consciousness is literally created by that. Nothing does that as well as strife. Makes you immediately aware of two things clashing together.
Strife, isn't it? It's just another word for a concentration of energy, really, isn't it?
Yes, from two sides.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the theatre we call it drama.
And when you've got such a concentration of energy has got to do some work. You can't, energy, you've got to do some work. It's got to do some work. When you get so much in one confined space, it's got to do something. It's got to do some work.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the creation.
It feels itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we celled ourselves up. Because without that we would have just spread out and diffused. So in meditation often, if you do a Turiya session, you actually lose your edges. The idea is you talk yourself down and you stimulate feeling without any edges. And you go outwards constantly and you've got an in-center, but you've got no edges. And you're feeling out as far as you can. So you're going back to a non-walled up situation. You're going pre-Simeon and Levi. Well, the lawmakers, law is, you remember, it's all backwards. It's what we use socially to tie people up. We give them laws. You lay down a law in the same way as you lay down a wall, and it traps people. If you can't literally put them in a cell, you tie them up with your tongue. Give them words, like lawyers do. Thou shalt not. Traps them. So the Levites are the lawmakers in the Israelites. They're the ones who write down. Leviticus is all about laws, by the Levites. So they're the ones who set down the laws which trap us if we can't build walls. We actually do it with words. Or morals, which is the same as mules.
Cleverly get around it by, finding ways. I was only reading about that last night. I think it was Christian Hitchens, that they find ways of getting around it, that they don't have to do these things, like if you pay someone else to do it for you or whatever. So that a whole lot of energy is expended on these laws. I'm just saying the Jewish people because it's the Old Testament, isn't
All
it?
people do it.
All people do it, but in this case, that's what we're talking about. The Leviticus is all the laws, and now there's must be an enormous industry, expense, energy, and everything spent on making sure all these Jewish people carry out these laws.
It's not just that, as you say, it's everybody.
Well, in their own way, it's everybody, yes, but
If you can find a distinction, you've got an angle. So
if you say you're not to work on a Sunday or something, and then you find a way round.
Well, what you usually say is, no, we don't work on a Sunday, or we do work on a Sunday. You've got a distinction that separates two groups of people. So you can actually put a wedge in between them there. And has been pointed out by a certain person, we've mentioned several times, that wherever the British went, as they walked away, they left a civil war behind them. Rhodesia, South Africa, Cyprus. You name all the places that we pulled out of and left fights going on behind us.
And the French did.
Well, because you never leave a unified country, they're dangerous. India, look what we did to India. All you Pakistanis, all you Muslims go to this place, all you Hindus go to another place. I think we moved something like 26 million people. Oh yes.
Well, they hadn't moved themselves, didn't they?
Well, yes, but we said that, you know, don't want to find you here tomorrow. Yeah.
I'm a bit puzzled here. I'm hearing contradiction going on.
Yes, self-contradiction, internal self-contradiction.
Yeah. On the one hand, meditate and get rid of the boundaries, and on the other hand, have separation because this is the way, the process.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I don't.
Yeah, you must do both. To be sophisticated, you have to do both.
So yes, that's fine. That's
One begets the other, really, because to do one is not sufficient.
Aren't there a series of compensations? So it's like, at the moment, if you look at all the arts that I know of anyway, that we frequent, whether it's visual or music or philosophy or literature or whatever, there are new forms which would, if you take music for example, though I mean I'm not an authority like you are on that, but a lot of things which an ordinary people who are used to melody and lehar and stuff like that would find the dissonance is very difficult and not immediately absorbable or acceptable.
Yes.
So you've got a bit of a problem with it, and it's happening certainly in visual art and all the others that I know of, and yet there's a lot of programs that deal with taking us back to the past and looking at the, you know, the remembering this and remembering that. I mean, it's like after the war, the upset people so much that there's a sort of levelling out somehow to keep a reasonable amount of workable life.
Yes, because a lot of the 20th century has been involved with loud noises, tremendous structural changes, social changes, and I said once to Eugene Halliday, because we were talking about music, I said, don't you like rock music? And he said, no, but then I wasn't conceived in an air raid shelter. Until you, I mean, if you hear very strong, loud rock music, you can hear machines, you can hear literally aeroplanes and things like this. It is very loud, engineering type noises which you're getting, literally structured and rhythmically patterned so that they're acceptable. That's what's happening. We are literally being to be more and more adaptable. A friend of mine says, you know, before the blues came, certain notes would never be played alongside each other, and now we found them very satisfying. If you know, you can hear these dissonance, which actually sounds sweet to us in a sort of melancholy way. You know, so this is progress in all forms, and in the 20th century we've really rushed ahead. But at any given point, there'll be people who feel lost. You know, they need pastoral situations and music. Why the hell did we go to France? You know, because we're going back into a country area which is very reminiscent of what it was in England in Victorian times. I can only think. You know, we don't have those spaces. But I relax as soon as I get on the French roads because there aren't as many cars as we've got. So there's no somebody at your backside every 5 minutes. You know, you have to wait every 10 minutes to get somebody right up your backside. Different feeling altogether.
Plus they have good cakes.
Pardon?
They have good cakes.
They have good cakes as well, yes.
You can still go motoring in France.
You can still go motoring in France, yes, that's true. But yes, there are, you know, we do need to go back to a previous state sometime. Like you do with children, you know, you rock them to remind them of when they were in utero. It helps them to sleep and to relax because this world is very frictive. It's very loud, it's very disorientating to them, and you do need to do these simply. You put them on swings and they love it. You know, you coo to them and sing them things to take them back to a previous state because you want them to relax. We need both. We need to do this to ourselves, and we need to put ourselves in very tense situations as we can. You know, how much of this can I tolerate? How dangerous can I allow myself to be and still come back from it without literally killing this thing because this is my experiencer and I don't want it to die yet. But change your diet, do this, stop eating. Eugene was constantly doing fasts and things to see what his body would do.
Don Lord's having you once, he said, one of Eugene's things was, he said to Don, choose your favourite cake, go to a cake shop, stand looking at it until you're salivating and nearly going mad, and then just walk away. You got free choice then.
Free choice. Don't know whether you heard that. Sue just said she does that all the time.
In that case, go and buy it and eat it.
Right. Internal self-contradiction again. Yeah. So, Simeon and Levi, there is possibly more to that than meets the eye. There's a great thing, by the way, that came out in about 69 called Hamlet's Mill, which translates and implies, and some people would say actually nails down, the fact that there is astrological information written in every folklore tale that you've ever heard of. Now this is a thing which is put forward by sociologists and anthropologists, and they've said that you can look and find, and they've got vast numbers where they're saying that buried in a lot of these meaningless stories from prehistory are a vast amount of mathematical information which they constantly keep finding. So written literally into the text of these things and into the story in the Rig Vedic stuff and the symbolism in that, they have found mathematical formula which are deeply scientific, well, astrological and astronomical, which is fascinating to find. So when you see somebody like Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, who are very, very literally glib in what they say, they're not giving anything like the full story. And they tend to literally choose their battles very closely, very clearly. It's 10:30. Should we go on for a bit more, or should we?
I will have to.
We're going to have to go.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a drive to get back.
Pubs are still open.
I'm up at the Cracker Sparrow class in the morning, so
Okay. Right, okay. We'll just try and do a little bit more on this, then we'll finish. I just want to nail that down a little bit because we've opened a topic here when we haven't come to any sort of conclusion yet. Yeah. Now in the Bible, this wall building is called a when it says they dig the wall, the reason is that they take a bit of earth that you put your spade in here and throw it up, and you get a ditch and a wall, something like a sine wave. They dig the wall. Now if this wave is actually the kind of process that sets up this wall inside, there is a depression and an elevation corresponding with each other. Where they are. Yeah, that's it, yes, in the green. In the same way, every resistance in the body is a dynamic resistance. There are no materials in the universe other than force behaviors, and matter is a function of force. So when he says that that's an energy field, an energy sort of wave, he actually means that that is the process by which consciousness separates itself into sections. When the plasm contracts, it makes the zone difficult to penetrate. And when it expands, it makes the zone easy to penetrate. And it does this alternately and very, very rapidly. And it does this throughout the continuance of the protoplasm, and thus it keeps the walls in being dynamically. All these walls are simply functions of force by vibrating very strongly. And you know that when you spin a bicycle wheel, if you try to put your finger through it, your finger will get hurt. And the faster you spin the wheel, the easier it is to get hurt. And if you stop the wheel, you can put your finger between the spokes very, very easily. So you see there's a relation between the solidity of matter and velocity. Okay? Now that's a better place for us to finish, I think. Because we've finished that concept in a sense. So would you like